May kasabihan na pag malapit ng elections, lahat gusto mag-opposition, no? This is what you keep on hearing, no? Na pagdating sa midterm elections, mukhang pro-incumbency ito. The tendencies for the incumbent, kung sinong presidente, to make the most of the advantages of the office and to make sure na yung kanilang aliado will do well. Of course, we have had quite exceptions to that, including under former President Arroyo. But generally, if you look at at least the recent midterm elections under President Aquino, under President Duterte, the allies of the president tend to do well. Pero pagdating sa the next presidential cycle, mukhang anti-incumbency tends to be the the trend, kung saan mukhang ang gusto ng taong bayan is something different. And in the case of transition from President Aquino to President Duterte, something radically different, So of course, ang inisip ng maraming tao is, well, as we head towards 2022 elections, baka naman lahat naman gusto maging anti-Duterte. There are a number of problems with that argument. First of all, well, history rarely repeats and sometimes it rhymes. But there's certain instances whereby, certain people, yung mga, let's just call them smart leaders, learn from the past and make sure that the future would be different, that this time it will be different. So it's very possible that, the same way that President Marcos changed the direction of the country, in the early 1970s, maybe President Duterte can also change the direction of the country, not by declaring martial law, but by doing something quite, unprecedented. And in this case, ang narinig natin is President Duterte might run for the vice presidency along with an anointed successor. It looks like by surveys, it's not going to be his, favorite aide or longtime aide, Senator Christopher Bongo, but it seems like it's going to be Mayor Sara Duterte, who will be the presidential bet of the incumbent, So, and that's a formidable tandem. Kitang-kita natin sa mga surveys na the Duterte tandem could actually pull it off. And there's also some debate on whether, since walang express provision sa ating saligang batas on a president running for vice presidency, then perhaps there's no constitutional barrier to that. Of course, a lot of constitutional experts will disagree with that, like Christian Munsod, among others. But, well, things are okay if you have an independent Supreme Court, but do we have, for instance, independent judicial institutions that could be called upon to intervene against a powerful and popular incumbent? Well, that's a question that a lot of people are raising, especially from the opposition. But that's a separate debate. Wag tayo pumunta dyan. But, President Duterte happened to appoint many members of the Supreme Court. That's just a fact. But let's also look at the fact that President Duterte is maintaining still very high approval rating way into the end of his presidency. President Aquino was relatively popular until the end of his term, numbers between 50-55% approval ratings. President Duterte is, in some surveys, is around that. So Publicos Asia, I think, puts it somewhere between 55 to 65. But if we are to believe other surveys, the numbers could be as high as 80 or 90%. So very popular pa rin si President Duterte. And I don't know kung naalala nyo, in an interview I had with Jessica Soho back in the days during 2016 elections, I described President Duterte as a meta candidate. This was on Jessica Soho's show. And meta candidate because ang argument ko dito is normal rules of the game do not apply to President Duterte. Nassim Taleb and some experts, they have a term for that. It's called anti-fragility, or parang or I think it's more colloquially called Teflon effect. Yung parang the usual things that tend to bring a lot of politicians down, they just don't work on President Duterte. He dictates the rules of the game. So meta siya. He's above the normal rules of the game. In that sense, revolutionary yung kanyang approach to politics. Not necessarily his politics, but his approach to winning power and staying power is very much revolutionary. Itong nakita natin kay Pangulong Duterte so far. At that may also explain why he has been able to maintain very high approval rating, even though numbers will suggest that Philippines has had one of the worst economic recessions on earth, similar to Peru, similar to India. in some of the worst affected countries also, like South Africa and Cuba, no? We see in some of these countries may massive protests na, or in the case of Peru, we saw, a new president from an extreme left side. In the case of the Philippines, it seems numbers of President Duterte are not moving very much despite the economic recession, deep economic recession, around 10%, no, economic recession last year. Nag-shrink pa rin ang economy natin first quarter of this year. Now, if you look at the total numbers of COVID-19 infections, among others, since last year, again, among the worst in Southeast Asia and Filipinas, even if we include the recent spike in Vietnam, in Malaysia, Thailand, so on and so forth, still the Philippines is just up there, near countries like Indonesia, no? Although Indonesia, of course, is in a far worse situation right now. Now, so if you just look at performance, it doesn't look like President Duterte's performance would warrant an approval rating of between 60 to 90%, and yet that is the case we have with the surveys. And if you kind of try to get a kind of an average of different surveys, he's somewhere around 70%. So that's very high approval rating, no? Right? It usually happens at the very early stage of a peaceful elections and the bomb of unity and all of that, no? So with that in mind, I'm not very sure kung the argument na lahat biglang gusto mag-opposition will work. I think many people in the political establishment in the Philippines would want to be Duterte's preferred successor or to be endorsed by President Duterte. And then things got a little bit funny, no? At dito, kitang-kita natin na mukhang within the ruling establishment, within the alliance of President Duterte, certain cracks are beginning to appear, especially when allies of President Duterte in the PDP Laban and beyond send the signal out na President Duterte might consider trying to stay in power, albeit through, various, through unprecedented means, not martial law, not canceling elections or no, but through running for the vice presidency with an anointed successor. We saw something similar to that actually in the past with another very popular populist and strongman in the person of Vladimir Putin of Russia when he met constitutional restrictions, hindi na siya pwede tumakbo ulit. What he did was he placed Medvedev, his longtime aide, or some would say the Robin to the Batman of Putin. Naging president siya, pero prime minister si Putin. But of course, we know things got a little bit complicated. But at the end of the day, Putin was still calling the shots, right? So many people are saying maybe this is a Putin-Medvedev kind of move we're talking about. And what's interesting here is that mukhang some of the allies of the president were quite surprised by this, no? Para sa kanila, wait lang, we are supporting you. Past 5 years, sinuportahan ka namin on many controversial issues, on your relations with China, on relations with US, a war on drugs, so on and so forth, shutting down of ABS-CBN, all of these things, we stood by you and then hang around or place an anointed successor in power by backing that person up big time in the next year elections. Not very sure about that. So mukhang yan ang nagiging position of some of the allies of the president, and I think the embodiment of that anxiety within the ruling establishment is no less than Pac-Man, no? Manny Pacquiao, no? I think Pacquiao definitely had his eyes set on the office of the presidency. I think on multiple occasions throughout the years, he has mentioned that he's looking at the presidency. Freddie Roach, people around him in the boxing world were looking at him, sometimes even openly called him as the next president of the Philippines. I think that he got kind of absorbed that, no? Na parang he could be a savior for the country. No, that he could really change the situation for the country if he becomes the president